Hey, what's good everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about the mechanics of how to make a sound that kind of resembles something like this. Now basically, if you've seen my earlier videos on creating like glitch stuff, then you'll know that this is going to build off of some of those concepts, but just for the sake of review, we'll be taking a look at some of those. And I can't really like give you guys this patch unless if you have every single thing that I would have on Bitwig, but I can try to walk you guys through all the steps in order to be able to kind of like get close in the ballpark. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and open up Phaseplant and let's figure out how to make something kind of like this. Now, first thing, I'm actually going to make sure that nothing is coming through. Okay, so first things first, I am starting with the square wave, and the premise of how all this stuff works is basically throwing on a lot of effects and then setting these to different randomizers and such. And if I were to walk through every parameter, then this video would be a lot longer than it needs to be, but just try to keep in mind that if anything sounds cool whenever you make a change and you turn a knob, then add some kind of randomizer to it, and also like make sure that you play with going between a curved randomizer and then also like a sequencer square shaped type of randomizer as well, because a combination between those two will help you get morphing sounds and also jarring sounds that kind of resemble a glitch, if that makes sense. With that main mechanic out of the way, if you see anything that's highlighted in orange, then that will kind of tell you that something is moving, and then also let it be known that these modulators here are being randomized by clicking on something like this and then clicking on the star under them to kind of modulate or randomize anything that's kind of under that, if that makes sense. So with that out of the way, like again, don't try to copy this patch because it's just not going to happen for you. And like again, like just try to take away the kind of like tricks and mechanics of this, as opposed to being like, oh, I need to recreate this exactly, because I guarantee like even if you recreate this, you'll still get some cool stuff. We've got a square oscillator with a unison of 2, and then we also have a fundamental right here that's just a sine wave. Both of these are being FM'd at random by this wavetable right here, which is Newspeak under the vocals, and there's a randomizer on the frame, and then these are modulating the drive of the saturator and the cutoff of a bandpass filter. On top of that, there's a randomizer on the cutoff as well, so it's just kind of doing unpredictable things, and I don't even really know what happens if you FM a cutoff. If somebody knows what that is, then feel free to educate me, but it ends up getting some pretty cool stuff. So let me actually go ahead and make sure that all that's turned off. Let me turn off everything here so that way we can kind of take a checkpoint of where we're at, just to kind of get a feel for a ballpark estimate. I'm going to leave the stereo and limiter on though, okay? This is just to make sure that no clipping happens. So really, it's just a fat, disgusting, distorted mess, and this is like anything will do. Literally just throw any kind of FM thing together. Don't worry about the initial sound, just slap some stuff together. After that, one thing to keep in mind is that there's some detuning on the harmonic right here, and this is kind of like a cool way that I've started introducing some cool phase oscillation, is through shifting the harmonic of the FM as opposed to just detuning, and that usually ends up giving me some cool results. Not all the time, but it's worked quite a few times. So on the distortion tab, it's just some saturate with some gentle drive by 4 dB. The filter, or I guess the first filter that we use, is a notch. I've talked about this trick many times of having a deep slope and then automating the resonance and the cutoff to create a low pass and high pass like thing that moves. It makes it sound really good. You can already tell like how deep and how much movement you can get just from doing that. And if you want something that's a little bit smoother, then just make sure that whatever is being randomized is a smooth curve as opposed to being jarring, where I think these are just kind of a mix between those two. This is an interesting effect because when you mess with the mix, it will go from kind of partially reversing the sound to doing the whole thing. So I have the time automated and then also modulated rather, and then also the mix. And that obviously sounds terrible right now, but it's okay. Let's just keep going. There is a reverb being automated, so I wanted to kind of play with space opening and closing, and that's why I added this. So I tend to modulate the decay in the mix. The delay is actually going to dictate a lot of the pitch stuff with this. So I'm automating the feedback at the same time as the mix, and then also a different randomizer is automating the time. And this will mess with the pitch a little bit. All right, next up, we've got another delay that's doing something completely different. So sometimes when you stack delays like this, then they'll interact with each other. And as you can tell, like, you get some kind of metallic vibes off of that, and sometimes it can be pretty cool. So I encourage you guys to play with a few delays and then maybe not even like stack them next to each other, place them in different areas of your effects chain. So the slice EQ is just how I do custom filters. It's one of the coolest things about not only slice EQ, but also Phaseplant in general. If you have this, you can pretty much set this up to make any kind of filter that you want. And so I have a combination of a boost and a band reject or a notch, and everything on here is just being automated that I can possibly do, because you get like really unpredictable results, especially when you add a randomizer to it. One thing that I actually do want to mention with this is that if you notice, the frequencies that I'm trying to boost right here are actually trying to stay somewhere similar to the low mids, because when you boost those low frequency harmonics, that generally brings out more of the vocal sounds that we're looking for. So while this is a little bit sporadic, the chaos in some way or another is sort of controlled. Sorry, Shadow, no pun intended. Okay, so next up we have multipass. And this is kind of just a fun way to create your own custom effects that are multiband. And if you have Bitwig, then at any point in time you can throw this on here, but it's kind of just doing the same old thing where I've got a high pass, a band pass, also a notch. This one also has a comb filter. And then on top, it's a formant filter that's being ever so slightly automated and modulated rather. And then another top filter that's cutting the top off, low pass. This is kind of a cool trick that I've been doing lately. I think that I'll do another video on it that kind of goes more into detail on it, but if you set the randomizer to these two different X and Y values and you kind of just keep it pretty mild, then usually you can get some really good stuff out of it. And if you notice at the bottom, these are also being automated or modulated with the mix, because if you leave this on 100% mix, then you're gonna cut too much of the sound out. So we want to think about like creating movement by taking some of the mix away and then reintroducing some of the mix to make it sound like it's going from quiet to loud, or really just moving all the frequencies in such a way. There's another one on here as well, but I'm doing the exact same thing, just in a different spot. So yeah. Last off, we have some compression right here, and it's nothing crazy. I'm just kind of giving it just a little bit of controlled taming, I would say. And then of course we're automating the overall mix from that. And that sounds like this. So you can tell, like, without any outside processing, you can already get pretty close to the original sound that I played at the beginning of the video. I did also forget to mention that I'm automating these as well on a curved randomizer, but this isn't entirely necessary. It's just like an extra thing if you want to do that. So from here, we are using a comb filter that's automating the mix and then also the, I guess, hertz frequency value. And then right here we have another reverser. The stereo is just trying to make sure that we are controlling some of the low end on here, especially because we're making a bass out of this, and then we have a limiter to make sure that nothing is peaking. If you want to create glitches out of this, the easiest thing that you can do is take away add any of these randomizers to the master pitch, and that will automatically give you like crazy, unpredictable sounds more so than this. The thing with this is that I'm playing a low F, and so while the pitch does drift a little bit, we're still trying to keep the fundamental in some of the sounds here, and that's what I'm trying to keep in mind. Even from this point on, most of the stuff here is just a combination of some kind of saturation, distortion, and filtering, but even if you can get this far, you can already start to create some cool variations in order to control that stuff. So moving on, we have a disperser, and that is just set at an F2, and these are the settings. There's not really anything else left to it. As you can tell, it makes it a little bit more kind of like wettish. And then we're reinforcing the fundamental by adding an F1 resonator on a saw wave with these settings here. If you have Portal, it's optional, but I can tell you that if you set some randomizers on this, then you'll get some pretty cool results as well, where I'm randomizing the pitch, the density, the size, and then having some random, I guess, multi-stage envelope on the retrigger and the offset. But this isn't essential to what I was playing, and this was actually turned off at the beginning of the video. This is kind of just boosting the fundamental of this and taking out some of the low mids, as you can see, and then I'm also removing some of the boom at like anything below 20 hertz. And this is just kind of helping try to bring back some of that low end as well. Yeah. Alright, so the Vocoder is one of my favorite tools within Bitwig. This is kind of the default setting that I've gotten accustomed to. Taking the sub bass out of this and turn everything else up. 80 bands, usually like 174 on the bandpass resonance, and then make sure to turn the attack and release down. And now you're playing with power. Filter is next. Just set out a random notch. I kind of just let that go and do whatever it wants to do. Typically, if I have a randomizer on, I usually just have it set at like a bar or maybe even a half note and just kind of let it play. But this is just, again, kind of adding some extra filter goodness to it. All right, so this is my custom filter that I use anytime I use a multi-band FX3. The bass is in mono right here, and I've got that high pass like we've talked about in the multi-pass patch. There's a band pass right here, and then a low pass right here. And then I'm also automating the mix and the frequency cutoff, or the crossover rather, from the low and high bands. And if you're into neurobass and you want those crazy like morphing filters and stuff, this is one of the easiest ways to accomplish that. The saturator is obviously bringing back a lot of the stuff that we're cutting out from this. So the settings are right here. That sounds so cool. All right, and then the FX2 is honestly just making sure that the low end is in mono. So if you're in like Ableton or something, you can just go bass mono and then anything below 150 hertz. This EQ right here is just a corrective means again for taking out some of those low mids and then cutting off anything that's on the super low. And then the OTT is helping bring back some of those high end frequencies. I tend to turn the time up on this a lot and use that as a transient shaper to shape the tail of this. And then I usually turn the depth down to like 50% or so. Awesome. Finally, we have a glue compressor, and that's just to make everything a lot louder. And if you know how the glue compressor works, you just want to turn the soft clip on and then kind of like mess with the threshold and makeup gain. That's pretty much the only thing that I've touched. And the limiter at the end is just to kind of double check that all the other external effects that we use doesn't push the limiter, or sorry, push the dB over 0. And from that point on, it's just a matter of bouncing out as a sound design jam or MudPie or something, and to get like crazy unpredictable results. And again, like this is just an evolution, or rather the glitch stuff that I have is an evolution of this kind of processing that I've already kind of gotten accustomed doing. And while I was making this, there wasn't really a rhyme or reason to this other than, okay, well, what else can I do to this? Okay, well, what else can I do to this? Okay, well, now would be a good time to maybe insert this. You know, after all this like filtering and stuff, I was like, all right, well, now let's slap on my randomizer filter and see how that sounds. Oh, I took too much sound away, so now I'm going to bring some of it back with a saturator. And that's kind of how I go about developing some of these like sound design formulas and stuff. You'll notice that like all of this stuff is open for interpretation, of course, but at the end, I generally have something that's kind of corrective, kind of like this stuff of, hey, let's bring some of this back, let's make it loud, and then let's make sure that it's not clipping, and then kind of like a corrective means of making sure that it's in mono, and everything else right here is kind of open for play. Like we could add a chorus, we could add a flanger within some of the effects here, and there's just a lot of space to variate. But basically, like these kinds of basses are really fun to do because I get to showcase all of the cool and neat little tricks that you can do without resampling. And once you get into that, you know, a lot of people here that watch my videos are kind of accustomed to editing audio, or just a matter of repeating tricks. And kind of like once you have a bunch of like sound design tricks that you can pull out, that's one of the best things about Phaseplant, is that you can kind of implement all those cool little things together to create something kind of like this. And it's not, you know, necessarily like all of these divided aren't necessarily complex. It's just a bunch of simple things or simple tricks put together in order to kind of create that as a whole. And that's why I like making these kinds of videos and making these kinds of sounds, because more often than not, I don't really hear anybody else on the internet making this kind of stuff. So much love to you guys, and thank you so much for watching my video. If you guys have any questions about anything, then feel free to leave it over in the comments and stuff. And again, you know, I apologize for not being able to give you something that you can recreate, but hopefully you can take at least one or two of these little tricks that I've given you and apply it to your your own sound design. And if you want more resources, you can go check out the products and stuff that I have available on my website, or you can consider joining the Patreon and all that good stuff. Yeah, whatever. Thank you guys though, and hopefully this was interesting to you. I'll see you in the next video.